Shortly after I graduated, I got indicted by the federal government. So I was originally caught with 140 grams of powder cocaine. And they basically wanted me to cooperate and tell on other people. I wasn't willing to do that because it was a decision that I made myself, and I didn't want to walk around the rest of my life knowing that I did that to someone else. They also transferred me from the prison that I was in to a violent offender unit where I was on lockdown 23 hours a day. So it's basically solitary confinement, and this was all pre-sentence. Entering into this system is really traumatic, and they basically strip you of all your societal kind of markings that make you who you are. But the one thing that they couldn't take from me was my ability to create. In the process of reading these newspapers and myself being depicted within the newspaper as this drug kingpin from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is like Amish country, and thinking about prison-issued soap, which is also a material that is directly used for sanitation and purification. So I began transferring images of offenders onto the surface of the soaps. And because this is a prison-issued material, you can't just send this out of the prison because it's considered contraband. The same way that I was making artwork to disconnect from this environment and invest myself in something, a lot of guys played cards. So I began to collect the cards after the guys were done playing with them, because they would always purchase new decks because they'd get beat up. And then they started passing me their old used cards. So it became a kind of communal process where they knew I was making this art project. They didn't necessarily know exactly what I was doing, but I basically said it was a big FU to the prison system. So everyone got excited about that. I started collecting the cards and then going through and kind of systematically cutting out the faces of kings, jacks, and queens. So I built these containers, and in order to even cut through the cards, I had to break open a AAA battery, and there's a connector that goes from positive to the negative in there, and it's like a tiny piece of metal. And I sharpened it on the floor of my cell and then built like a handle around it using deodorant labels. That is the entire exhibition. So this is basically a year of my life. 12 hours a day, probably more, creating these works, cutting out cutting through each card. There's over 6,000, close to 7,000 cards in this total installation. So it's this very kind of repetitive process. And for me, it also captures the kind of plasticity of time and the way that time registers also shift within this environment from being a kind of linear, progressive movement to being just kind of cyclical. So after we argued the drug weights at sentencing, I was found guilty of 500 grams, which is significantly less than 50 kilos. And the judge gave me a 70-month prison sentence. He also recommended that I go to a low-security facility as close to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and my family as possible. That's not what they did. So after I got sentenced, as a nonviolent offender, I got sent to Butner, North Carolina. So as a nonviolent offender, I'm basically in a maximum security penitentiary. You know, I was terrified at first. But after being there for a little while, I began to make artwork, and I began to connect with people through that artwork. And I had come to find out that everyone there was exactly like me. I began making this project, which is Apocalyptine 1638-9067. This is image transfers out of the newspaper using hair gel onto the surface of prison-issued sheets. So again, using contraband, using this material to kind of convey a message. And the reason that this material is important, like the soaps, is that it's produced in a program called Unicor. So Unicor is the production arm of the Bureau of Prisons. They have massive factories all across the country using inmate labor to produce things to keep the prison self-sustainable, prison sheets, spoons, trays. Again, over time, this project grew into 39 prison bed sheets. This is 15 feet tall by 40 feet long. It took me 3 years to make this. All image transfers, hand drawings back over top of the image transfers. And for me, this became a kind of surrogate body of sorts. So I was in this environment where You know, there are so many things that could have led to me staying there forever, right, or dying there. Yeah, this was kind of like my way to make an artwork that would encapsulate this experience and also kind of project me outside of the prison walls and allowed me to transcend the prison walls.